While many are hoping the new mayor will signal the start of a new chapter for Boston, it will be a long, hard fight to get past the city's troubled reputation, one that's driven many Black Boston area residents away with no plans to return. GBH News' Phillip Martin recently caught up with some former Bostonians now living in Atlanta to talk about why they left and how different life is for them now.
It's important to me that my daughter grow up in a city where people look like her and are successful. My parents are still the only Black family within 3 or 4 miles of where they live. Here in Atlanta, there is Black excellence on just about every corner. There's just a difference where there's certain battles you don't have to fight.
Atlanta is almost like we feel like we don't have to ask to do. You feel empowered. It's our town. Even though I was there for 20 years, I never felt like Boston was my town at all. And I love Boston.
And they're far from alone. I'm joined now by George Chip Greenidge, who grew up in Mission Hill and Cambridge, now splits his time between Boston and Atlanta. He's the founder and director of Greatest Minds Boston, as well as a visiting fellow at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at Harvard Kennedy School, and GBH News senior investigative reporter, Phillip Martin. Phillip, good to see you. Chip, it's great to meet you. Thank you both for being here.
Good to see you, Jim.
So glad to be here. Thank you, everybody.
Phillip, a great piece you did. You talked to 5 Black Bostonians who are no longer Bostonians, part of this so-called reverse Great Migration, as you term it. The numbers are quite large, are they not?
They're significant. I mean, if you think about how many people from the Northeast, that of course would include New York, but also includes Boston, Providence, other sites, other places here in the Northeast. And we're talking about over 1 million people in the Atlanta area now, and that's just over the last 2 or 3 decades, really the last 2 decades.
So, Phillip, staying with you for a second, was there a common thread in your estimation between the 5 former Bostonians? Well, 4.5, because Chip still has a 1 foot here. Between the 5 former Bostonians who you interviewed?
Well, there is no one common denominator, but there are several, and one is education. All of them are well educated. Some took off and went to school in Atlanta, Morehouse principally, as Chip here can attest to. He's a Morehouse graduate. And to Spelman, the 2 premier Black universities in the South and in Atlanta. But there was also a feeling that Boston just was not doing what they thought it would do for their futures, as they, or hoped it would do for their futures. And they saw in Atlanta a better prospect of life ahead in Atlanta as opposed to Boston.
Chip, I mentioned you are still splitting your time, but at least from Phillip's piece, it seems to me your heart appears to be in Atlanta. Why is that?
No, it's very interesting is that my, I have so much family and friends here. Mm-hmm. And you kind of think about our people that are from other countries that might even move here, but also have their heart still in their own countries. They follow the local news. They follow what's happening. They find out what's going on. So, I think there are lots of us that, our lives might be in Atlanta, but our hearts are still with Boston, with our friends and family and so forth.
But, Chip, we just spoke to a social scientist from Harvard who did a piece talking not about residential segregation, but about what I'll call movement segregation, where Black Bostonians mostly stay in similar neighborhoods when they travel throughout the day to shop, to socialize, to eat, that sort of thing. And the takeaway I had from that research is, and from Phillip's piece, is that Boston is a far less welcoming place to Black people than Atlanta is. Did I read too much into it?
I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, I'm very familiar with Robert Sampson's work. I follow it in my own studies. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. I want you to really think about some of these issues that we hear. I remember in 1989, I usually go to the football game with my dad for every Thanksgiving in high school. And then in college in 1989, we were living on Mission Hill. My father told me not to come home. And the reason why he told me not to come home, because it was the murder of Carol Stewart, and where young Black men were getting thrown against the walls with stop and frisk and all these things. So there was a whole piece about safety and support that I knew that my parents knew. And also I'm very familiar with Carson Beach, 1975 in August, where, there were Black people that were trying to, Black Bostonians enjoy the beach. And they were stopped by hundreds of state police officers telling them to leave. So these memories are always in the minds of young people and people that get passed down through family whispers. I also remember always wanting to go to the South Boston Parade at 5 and 6 years old, because I love parades. But my teacher told me I couldn't because of my skin color. I didn't understand that until my mom told me that. So these are things or whispers, family whispers, that live on to us today, how we navigate the city of Boston.
By the way, for people new to Boston, that murder was not committed by a young Black man, but by the husband, the white husband, who was implicating young Black men. You know, Phillip, you mentioned the electoral history in Atlanta. I think you say that there have been 2 Black mayors in a row, the 2 top candidates among the handful that are in the final today are also African American. Is that part of the mix, that there are established leaders, not just of color, but Black leaders in Atlanta that's part of a draw?
Well, that's it. I mean, you go back to the Mayor Maynard, if you will, and Chip, you could help me on this in terms of the history. But many years ago, I mean, Atlanta has had successive Black mayors, and so it's nothing new. The notion of a Black mayor, I mean, you have a city that's more than 50% African American. And so that electorate is very, in Fulton County, they're very much invested in having, if you will, Black political power. And the mayor is only one aspect of that. The city council is another. There also is new attention being paid to other aspects of politics, if you will, state government, which is a harder nut to crack in Georgia. So you basically have this bastion of blue, Fulton County, and Black politicians against a very hard core of conservative politics. I mean, just the notion of you have Stone Mountain, literally, like just up the road, really, and that is the symbol of white resistance for years in the South.
By the way, interesting a comment by Kyle Wells, who's one of the people you interviewed for your piece, who moved from Mattapan to Atlanta, talking about their perception of the Boston mayoral race today. Here's Kyle Wells.
The fact that neither of the Black candidates made it through, I'm not surprised. For Blacks, there is still a perception. We're minorities, but we aren't the ideal ones.
You know, Chip, you did, I think it was called the late debate, where both candidates showed up late in the process. Here, did some of the issues we're talking about, that Robert Sampson talked about, did they arise in that forum you led?
Yes, definitely.
How so?
It was very much about where do people go at night and where they feel welcomed. And it's very interesting is that what we're finding is that people are not feeling too comfortable going to the seaport or going to other parts, because they find the places being very, very unwelcoming. And so if they want to go to downtown Boston, they find that there are many dress codes that are instituted while they're there, where they see a white person will go on with the same clothing and they just walk right in and they say, wait up, he just had on sneakers too. And so it's really interesting as you look at all these pieces, especially the work of Robert Sampson, looking at the cell phone data and interesting things about where people migrate. They migrate where they're more comfortable.
By the way, one interesting thing I think I read in a summary of your forum that Michelle Wu said, either there or afterwards, she mentioned the fact that there are thousands of liquor licenses in the city, yet only 8, and that number is correct, 8 in Black-owned restaurants, which is just staggering. You know, before you gentlemen go, I only have about 90 seconds left. Starting with you, Phillip, there's going to be a new mayor probably, well, not probably, in exactly 2 weeks. She will be sworn in. In light of what happened in the Sampson-Tanisha Sullivan conversation, and in light of what you wrote about, what advice do you have for the incoming mayor? Phillip, starting with you quickly, if you can.
I think you just have to have an open door, and I mean not an open door that's ajar, but an open door inviting African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans into City Hall to basically look at things as they begin. The Seaport, for example, is one of those projects that was way ahead of before anyone knew what was going on. Thus, there was no black, there was no Latino, there was no Asian American input into that project. And so before these things begin, folks should be allowed in on day one, not years later.
Understood.
In terms of projects and in terms of ideas.
Chip, I have 30 seconds. What's your guidance for the next mayor of the city?
My guidance is really looking at that study by the Federal Reserve Bank, The Color of Wealth. $8 for Black families and households. That number, if this mayor is not moving that needle at all, that is the cornerstone for Black communities to actually do the major judging of what's going to be going on in the next 4 years.
8 for Black families, 247,000 for white families. Chip, I'm really glad to have met you. Phillip, again, congratulations on your piece. It was
Thank you,
great.
Jim.
Thanks, gentlemen.